Drama Llamas! Today we're going to be talking more about theater history with the English Renaissance and the Elizabethan theater. Let's get started, shall we? Well, let's talk about the era first. So sometimes it's also referred to as the Elizabethan age or the Golden Age for England. And this is really personified by the fact that Queen Elizabeth I ruled from 1558 to 1608. Sorry, 1603. When she came to power, she had to help the country deal with a lot of religious unrest. And because of this unrest, the government eventually banned any religious theater. So the stuff that we had learned, like in the medieval times, where it was based a lot on religion, that she basically said this is not good, that needs to be something different. It shouldn't be a religious-based plays anymore. Eventually, the Licensing Act of 1559 allowed for the theater under government control. So the government was sanctioning theater. Actors still had bad reputations. I'm saying actors as the males, because in the Elizabethan theater, there was only male performers. Young men and men who hadn't, had their voices dropped would play women roles. And there was a special, people that played women's roles. So all male actors, and theater in general kind of had a bad reputation in society, even though all the upper crust had things like the court dramas that they would go see and things like that. It still sort of had a bad reputation. During the bubonic plague, regulation really restricted any travel, and you had to have a license to perform. That's that Licensing Act. So what they would do to kind of show government control is that an English nobleman would buy a license for their group of actors. This would be like their acting company or troupe, kind of like the Commedia dell'arte in the Italian Renaissance. But instead of them doing it on their own, you were answering to a nobleman. So like the Lord Chamberlain's men. That was a very popular one. This protected them from harsh laws, and they had to follow certain rules and regulations as well to do any performances. Sometimes acting companies and troupes would perform in the courtyards of inns and taverns, also known as inn yards. So that's kind of where a lot of the acting sort of started before they started to build theaters. The first permanent public theater in England was built, it was called, kind of easy to figure out, the Theatre. More theaters were then built after this. The design of it and other theaters were inspired by the Greeks and the Roman amphitheaters. It was outdoors, unlike the Italians who were indoors. Playwrights, not just Shakespeare, were really common. They were known as the university wits, and these are wits who went to university and were not just uneducated. Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, and Thomas Middleton are some of the famous playwrights, not just Shakespeare. Shakespeare became the most famous because he wrote things that were more relatable and the use of the language of more of that time period. Shakespeare, though his father was a very important craftsman and important in his community, he did not go to university like some of the university wits. Speaking of Sir William Shakespeare, let's talk about him now more specifically. He was baptized April 23rd, 1564. We don't have a birth date because births weren't registered and written down. Back in this time period, your birth date was your date of baptism. So that was the time you were accepted, to have been alive, is at your baptism. Usually it's a couple days sometimes less. So April 23rd, we're saying that's his birthday. Well, he also sadly died April 23rd in 1660. We're not 100% sure how Shakespeare died. There's some saying that he got pneumonia because he was out in the garden and fell asleep. There's so many things. We don't really know exactly how he died. We did know that he died at Stratford-upon-Avon, his hometown, in 1660, where he currently is buried at their church. His wife, Anne Hathaway, not Anne Hathaway like Devil Wears Prada, or when she played Catwoman, not that Anne Hathaway. That'd be weird. But he married a woman named Anne Hathaway in Stratford-upon-Avon, and they had 3 kids. Now, Shakespeare, there's a reason why we still talk about Shakespeare, is because he at least had 37 plays in total that he wrote. He wrote comedies, tragedies, and histories. These were the 3 types of major plays in this time period. Obviously, comedies are meant to be funny. Usually they would end in marriage at the end of the stories. Tragedies always ended with people dying. And histories, which was, I'm going to say, loosely based on the history of the English country. He also wrote 154 sonnets and invented over 2,000 words. So some of these words you might recognize. Let's look at some. So, words and phrases that Shakespeare invented. So, things like rant, in a pickle, all's well that ends well, what the dickens, full circle, good riddance, watchdog, dead as a doornail, all of a sudden, zany, obscene, addiction, assassination, knock knock, who's there? A laughingstock. All these are some of the phrases and words that he invented. A heart of gold, etc. So you'll be surprised how much he wrote and came up with. So Shakespeare wrote a lot of different plays and comedies, and I'm just kind of hitting a couple of the most popular ones. Probably the most well-known for us is A Midsummer Night's Dream. And then The Tempest, which was his last play that he wrote. Much to Do About Nothing, The Winter's Tale, As You Like It, Twelfth Night. These are some of the most common, and you can go and watch modern versions of these. So there's a bunch of Midsummer Night's Dreams where it's been made, the story itself has been made more modern, and so much like Twelfth Night and like A Taming of the Shrew is a real popular one. If not She's All That, I'm sorry. 10 Things I Hate About You is based off Taming of the Shrew. So there's a lot of different movies that you might not even realize that are based off of Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies. So probably the most well-known he is for his tragedies, which includes Romeo and Juliet, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Macbeth, or as we like to say it in the theater, the Scottish play, because it's bad luck to say Macbeth in a theater. Othello, Julius Caesar, King Lear, and Hamlet. Hamlet, to be or not to be. So, now what makes Shakespeare a little bit more different is that he wrote in this thing called iambic pentameter. There are 5 iambs per line, and an iamb is a metric foot, or 2 syllables. Like if you look at the word hello, 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 it's got 2 syllables, and that's an iamb. So in a line, you would have I am, hello, how are you two? Something like that. Let's look at, here's an example of I am. So I'm going to read it just normal, and then I'm going to go over to the side that's highlighted and talk about how I am, you would say it. Puppet, why so I that the way goes. Now I perceive that she hath made compare between our statures. She hath urged her height, forsooth, she hath prevailed with him. And are you grown so high in his esteem? Because I am so dwarfish and so low. How am I, thou painted maypole? Speak, how low am I? I am not yet so low, but with that my nails can reach into thine eyes. So I naturally kind of do the I am, but let's kind of look at it more specifically with the yellow highlights. So what you would look at, so puppet, why so, I that, way goes the game. I'm going to bring my mouse up here. So puppet, 1 I am, why so, 2, I that, 3, way goes. 4, the game. 5. So you see there are 5 I ams. Now, usually when you're starting to learn Shakespeare, the idea is that it is a heartbeat. Bum, 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 bum. Puppet. Why so? I that way goes. The game. Now I perceive that she hath made compare between our statures. She hath urged her height, forsooth, she hath prevailed with him, etc., etc. So that's a great way to get the general feel of how you say it. Now, when you're performing it, you use that idea to help you memorize it and kind of get the flow of Shakespeare. And, punctuation is so important. So, like, puppet, why so? That way goes the game. Now, I perceive that she hath made compare between our statures. She hath urged her height, forsooth, she hath prevailed with him. And are you grown so high in his esteem? Because I am so dwarfish and so low. How low am I, thou painted maypole? Speak! How low am I? I am not yet so low, but that my nails can reach unto thine eyes. Got a little crazy there at the end. So that kind of helps you when you're saying it. Shakespeare's writing in things that, like, be metaphors and stuff like that. So sometimes when you're trying to interpret the text, there's some really great websites that you can use. The websites that are like No Fear for Shakespeare is one of the best, where they will have the text side by side, where you'll have the original text and what they're saying, if you're ever confused when you're reading Shakespeare. Now, let's talk about the theaters. Now, we talked about the theater being the first theater. Now let's talk about Shakespeare's theater, the Globe. Built in 1599 on the banks of the Thames River in Southwark, London. Built from pieces of the theater. So basically, the theater got told it was going to be torn down. The theater meaning like the name of the actual theater. And supposedly they took the pieces, like took it apart, and in the night moved it to some other place downriver and put it back up, and it became the Globe. Shakespeare, eventually, after working his way up the theater, was part owner. Many of his plays were performed at the Globe. His acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and then eventually becomes the King's Men, were the group performing. Now, audiences sizes usually could range for between 2,000 and 2,500. General admission would be a penny, entitled a spectator to what is known as the groundling, or the ground, or the pit. Some people who could stand in the yard in the pit. So if you got that cheap seat, you would be standing watching the show, and it would be open cover. We're going to look at a picture or a drawing in a second. The more expensive seats were in roofed galleries. So if you had a little bit more money, you could be not possibly in the rain. Let's look at this drawing. So there's a section cut out so we can see this better. So you can see that it is a circle around. It's open on the top, except for those gallery seats. So the gallery seats, and the closer you were, even these seats who maybe the actors are performing here, were some of the best seats because it was important to hear the plays. Seeing was important, of course, but you want to hear it more. So this is the diagram of the Globe. I'm going to talk about, certain things. So first is the flags. Flags were used in the Globe to tell you what type of show was going to be performing, whether it be a history, tragedy, etc. So you would see them as a patron flying above, and you could tell what type of show was going to be going on that afternoon. Number 2, this right here is called the heavens. So we're kind of harking back to the time of our medieval pageant wagon where the top layer would be the heaven part. And the reason it would be the heavens is because literally underneath it is painted to look like the stars and the heaven. And it has a bunch of the astrological signs on it as well, so that you can see, like, it's like the roof of the hut. And sometimes it's used for storage in addition to some sound effects, like they ring a bell up there or cannon fire or make thunder noises from the heavens. Number 3, right here, the tiring house, is dressing and storage area. Think about tiring, like attire is clothes you wear, and it's like your dressing area. You're putting on clothes. Next, number 4, where is she? There she is, up here, sorry, is the upper stage. This chamber was used for most bedroom and balcony scenes. So you would have Juliet standing here and Romeo here, and they would talk to each other. Then we have over here, these parts here, this is the galleries. These are 3 covered seating sections, 1, 2, 3. The audience paid more to sit there, like I said before. They had tiered wooden benches that would be under this roof, and this roof is called a thatched roof. It's a special way to make roofing. All right, number 6. This area right here, it should be pretty obvious that this is the main part of the stage, or the main stage. That's where most of the action took place. Then we have back here is the inner stage. This stage was used mostly for indoor scenes. They also had a curtain that could be open and closed for some changes back here as well. Then number 8, that's the open yard. So it's open to the elements up here. And that is where the groundlings, the people that paid that penny, you would stand in here. Rain or shine, you would stand here and watch the performance. Number 9 is the support pillar right here. The support pillars, these are wooden pillars that obviously hold up the roof that was painted to look like marble. Actors use these pillars to like hide behind when they're on stage and observe other characters. Number 10 is this trapdoor. So the trapdoor, actors playing like ghosts or witches could use this to like rock, like come from underneath or descend and disappear from, built on the main stage. There is a cellar underneath, and people would consider underneath would be like, since you're a witch, you were coming from hell. Excuse me. 11. Where are we? Sorry, 11. 11. There would be one main really entrance to the actual building, and that's where you would pay your penny or your pence to come in and watch the show. And then the brick foundation. So the brick foundation, the globe foundation, needed to be constructed of brick, as it was built on a wet and marshy land close to the Thames River. So it had to have a brick foundation, as opposed to some of the other buildings of this time period that didn't have that if it was farther away from the Thames River. And that is the basics to the Globe Theater. And this pretty much was common for all built theaters in the Elizabethan age. Well, guys, that has been a quick intro into English Renaissance and the Elizabethan theater, focusing on my homeboy, William Shakespeare. I hope you can get a chance to watch or read some Shakespeare to get to know him a lot better, or maybe even check out some modern adaptations. I will be adding in this playlist some links to some other videos that are actual modern day trailers of some of his plays, and some other helpful links. Check it out, and I will see you next time, llamas.